panel to come and join me, so you're not stuck with me for the next hour. I do have some guests. But actually, Tom, wonderful for us to follow. So if the ambition is ruthlessly simplistic, proactive digital services, we're going to start to talk about some of the things that are getting in the way of that. Thank you very much. So it's been recognised as a challenge for some time, and whilst a lot of work has been undertaken to try to modernise legacy, a national audit report issued earlier this year recognised still that there are huge gains that can be made by modernising government services, which allows greater efficiency. There was a panel earlier today that started to touch on the topic, and one of the biggest barriers that was stated to driving forward a culture of innovation in the public sector was legacy. It's complex, needs to be addressed in, I think, bite-sized chunks. And the panel here today, I'm hoping, will provide us with some insights that will have an informative, interesting, and enjoyable exchange. I'd like to ask the panel to introduce themselves, but as part of their introduction, really keen to get an opening view on what legacy is in your mind and what it means to you, please. Venus, starting with yourself. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Venus Bailey. I'm a principal enterprise architect at Carbon Office. So I've got my remit to overseas Carbon Office technology to a certain extent and degree, including GDS. Your question around what is legacy is actually more interesting than it sounds, defining legacy, because a lot of people associate legacy as old. But actually, not all technology are legacy, and not all legacy are old. So some technology has been running 2-3 years. If they haven't started properly, they become legacy very soon, very quickly. So usually we identify legacy technology with risk, associated with risk. So this can be security risk, like whether they are end-of-life support, or whether they can withstand the more modern security attacks. So for example, one of our systems is in a private data center. Everyone thought it was great, private data security center, everything secured, ring fence, but actually has not had a single application pen test since it was started. And to be honest, nowadays we have more likely to be attacked by people outside of the country than people attacking your data center. So that's one of the legacy that we need to tackle. We have business risk. Resilience is one of them. If your technology is buying spare part from eBay, that's probably not great in terms of resilience side of thing. And also knowledge as well. Do you actually have people in your organization that know how to maintain this service? We always use this story that there's a COBOL server at the corner of the office that only one person in the world know how to maintain that, and he's retired. So you have to get him back with extraordinary amount of money. And then the third angle we look at usually is around changes. Like it's a risk, but also opportunity. Does this legacy stop your organization from making innovations and also driving business changes? If it's stopping it, we also look at it from a bigger angle as well. So usually we don't talk about one systems, we have multiple systems. If all the other system has gone through refresh, like they are modern now, and you have this one system that is still old, it's kind of changing all the other system, connecting this one old system, pointless, because you can't actually take advantage of the modern things like API-driven automation or anything. So that would then become a priority of us trying to change the legacy. So that's the definition of our legacy based on approximately these areas. But it does vary from organization to organizations as well.
Venus, thank you. Fantastic start, and already a good view of some of the complexities that need to be addressed. Carl.
Yep, so I'm Carl Hood, CDO for Department for Energy Security Net Zero and Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, which seems to be getting longer and longer to say every time. And I won't mention
I made you say it.
Yeah, I won't mention integrated corporate services as well, which is another bit to add to that. So I think that Venus has covered quite comprehensively a number of the different areas of legacy for us. For me, it starts with that definition of why legacy is a problem, and we need to start thinking about, or continue to think about, how we continuously improve and invest in services that we're spinning up left, right and centre. I'm particularly interested in how we avoid legacy of the future. And just because we've moved things to the cloud doesn't mean to say we are now legacy free. So it's those kind of things that I'm thinking about in our role. Slightly easier for us in some cases in that we are fully cloud-based. We have no data centres, we have no massive legacy apps, nor are we a delivery department in that sense either. So we have some slightly different challenges.
Okay, thank you, Carl. And actually, Carl and David had put finger to keyboard on this topic before the session, if anybody fancies some reading material later. David.
So thank you very much. Great to be here. My name's David Knott. I'm a Government Chief Technology Officer within the Central Digital and Data Office within the Cabinet Office. So my job title is almost as long as Carl's. So I guess my perspective on legacy, and I should say as well, I'm relatively new to the public sector. I spent most of my career in the private sector. It's not a public sector or a private sector problem. It's a pervasive feature of the way we've been building and running technology for decades. My version of the retirement things, I used to work for a bank whose branch banking systems were so old that not only did they have to tip Exxon numbers onto the pin pads they used to authorise payments because they couldn't buy them anymore, but every time they needed to change it, they had to drag someone out of retirement. That person happened to live on a houseboat in the Netherlands, and they had to figure out where the houseboat was. So the movement of the boat around the canals of the Netherlands determined the release cycle for the code, which isn't a great thing. I tend to think three things about legacy. So the first one is old is not bad. Everybody who's written code knows that actually good code will carry on running if circumstances don't change indefinitely. But legacy is also a function of time, because the infrastructure software that it sits on does go bad over time. People find out it was always bad. It's just that over time people find out more of the vulnerabilities in it and exploit those vulnerabilities. And the code, the application code, we have a horrible habit of making bad changes and leaving it scarred and difficult to interpret. So old is not bad, but time creates legacy. My second belief is that legacy is not a technology problem, it's a management problem. Both of those things, the infrastructure level and the application software level, are addressable through good management. But occasionally we, the big collective we, including people who make spending decisions as people who make technology decisions, have chosen not to do it. And the third thing for me is that legacy remediation is for life, not just for Christmas. I'm not a huge fan of kind of the big crash diet style approach to legacy where things get out of hand. There's a big focus on it. The way you stop old being bad, the way you make legacy well managed, is by adopting an approach to continuous currency. That's an ingrained software management, software engineering, infrastructure management habit I think we all need to acquire. And again, most organisations that use technology inside the public sector and outside the public sector have not yet acquired that habit.
Thank you, David. Mark.
Hi, I'm Mark Watson. I'm the Chief Architect for Leidos in the UK, Quite a lot's been covered there. I guess my view of legacy, as David said, it's more than just technology. It's the strategy, it's the people, it's the skills, it's the processes, and the technology. When one or either of those things combine so that things don't interoperate properly, people have to have workarounds, there's vulnerabilities, and we can't go forwards in a modern collaborative way, that's when I think things start to become legacy, and we need to move past that.
Thank you, Mark. So, David, picking up on some of those comments, and this is at the moment very much for life and not just for Christmas. 6 months into the role, what's the biggest challenge that you're facing addressing legacy? And thinking through that, is there anything that could be done from a policy perspective to help?
Well, good question. So I've got to say, I'm new in the public sector, so I'm not a policy professional. I'm a technologist, but I'll give you an example of a policy from my previous life. I think Venus says, legacy is about risk. I think one dimension of legacy is about risk. I have worked for an organisation in the past that has had out-of-control legacy and adopted effectively a zero tolerance policies for certain categories of legacy. It happened to be a bank because I've spent most of my life working for banks, and banks have a very finely calibrated attitude to risk, and it's relatively good conversation. Yeah, it's relatively straightforward conversation to have with the bank. Say, here's our risk appetite. We can demonstrate we're either below or above that risk appetite, and choosing to tolerate certain categories of legacy, which include out of date hardware and software, unsupported stuff, things where we can't patch critical vulnerabilities within a certain period of time, are out of risk appetite, and therefore it's incumbent on everybody's duty to fix those. I haven't learned the vocabulary enough now yet to know whether that's real policy or not, but that's the kind of approach I think we need to be taking at a risk level. I think you asked about what surprised me or what's the big challenge. I mean, the key thing is, as I said, no huge surprises in terms of the state of the estate. Every organisation above a certain size has got their own sort of dark secrets of legacy systems, whether they're a private sector organisation or a public sector organisation. They all know what they should be doing. The real challenge is normally finding the bandwidth and the focus and the will often to knuckle down and really get to grips with that, the heart of legacy problems.
Okay. Has anyone got any thoughts to add to the zero tolerance approach and from your departments or roles? To David's comments?
I think I agree with the risk appetite very much, because legacy can mean different things to different departments, and how do we tolerate them, and that is going to be specific to the individual organizations to adopt that kind of definitions.
Yeah, I think there's back to the management point, right? I think sometimes in any organisation there's a tendency to think, well, we've done the transformation, that thing's finished, it's over there, we'll move on to the next thing. And then you get the next new shiny thing, and there are two particular letters that keep getting mentioned all the time at the moment.
I have no idea what they could
I'm not sure, one's at the very beginning of the alphabet, but we could move headlong into all of that, and then we've got a bunch of other things that sit in the background, which is the plumbing that will enable all of that other technology to work. So there's often that kind of trade-off between, look, we've got to go and do something new because we've got a new market to move into, or we've got a new set of products, but then we've got all this other legacy, in quotes, just all the other operational back office stuff that we need to keep maintaining. It's treading that balance and keeping that fine line between, we need to be progressive, but what we can't be doing is solely focused on all the new stuff and let everything else that we've got kind of wither on the vine.
Thank you. So who's having to deal with that? The people having to deal with all of that, having to deal with technology of every age. There was some conversation earlier around systems that had been built in the 1980s, and I suspect some of them are probably still hanging out celebrating great big birthdays at the moment. So picking up on that, Mark, people are a key part of the solution. And we've already had mention of individuals that have to be called in on very special basis to support systems that exist today. How do we deal with the legacy and have the right people to deal with that, but be ready to have the right digital skills in place for the future?
Yeah, thanks, Ros. That's a great question. And people, as you say, is the answer. It is definitely the people that you need to keep the lights on of the existing whilst you're transforming to the new. So if you take Venus's example of an old Cobalt system that was probably built in the, let's just say, the early 1990s, it's now been identified as a legacy system. Well, don't worry, because the technologists in your department have said, we're going to move to this new low-code power platform as a service based in the cloud, and that will fulfill all the needs of this application going forwards, which is great. But are there any problems? For a start, you've just told all your Cobalt engineers that in 12 months' time, their legacy skills will no longer be required. So you might be dusting up their CVs and leaving the company very soon. So it's very important that you engage transformation and the escape of legacy from a people-first perspective, in my view. Talk to the engineers, understand their thoughts and ideas, bring them in from inception through to delivery, show them the new technology, show them the pivotal role that they can have in the existing and the new, and provide the right time and budgets for those people to be upskilled. That will help you in not widening the skills gap that you have. There will still be a skills gap because we've mentioned this new technology that's come along, Power App. So there may be some people in your organisation that could be trained. You may need to recruit. And you may also want to go to partner organisations, your partners and suppliers, to help fill those gaps so that you can do that. My big ask to everybody in this room, you've probably heard it before, is when you have your legacy engineers, to call them that, your newly trained people, your recruited people, your partners and suppliers, put them into a single room together in what we call a rainbow team. Leave the badges at the door and let them work in harmony as a single team. The cross-collaboration and their experience together will help them grow and upskill and learn far faster than any classroom-based training that I've seen before. It's a really good way of helping you keep those skills, keep people motivated, and organically pass the skills from one to the other. As you start to leave that legacy system behind, you can start to decrease the workforce because you've got your partners and suppliers there with their SMEs, that as you start to be able to manage and maintain these systems yourselves, because you're upskilled, you can decrease that. So you're always being flexible and providing the best value for money at any one time, whilst de-risking the existing going wrong. Legacy will always be there at some point, and you will always be transforming. I've been transforming government systems for over 30 years now, and it's nothing new. But what I would say is shine a spotlight on those people that have come through, that have been upskilled, show in your departments and across government the opportunities to upskill and foster that collaborative upskilling and inquisitive mindset so that people feel empowered to leave legacy behind without fear and then move to the new.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay?
So Mark talked about what's coming for tomorrow. So looking as we move forward, Carl, how do we, moving forward, not create tomorrow's legacy? So we're not having this same conversation around some of the things that we're mentioning in the future.
Yeah, I think it's addressing some of those points that David raised around management, everything from funding and making sure that there's continuous improvement funding and continuous investment. There's addressing the age-old, how do we move from CapEx to OpEx type challenges and keep that constant education going. There's working with commercial colleagues when we're procuring to make sure that we're, kind of doing things in the right way and building in the right kind of measures. But then there's instilling that kind of culture around that as well. And that's the culture in terms of policy colleagues or our customers, however you want to define it, in terms of their ability to keep that continuous thinking going in terms of their own processes and policy. Then on technical side, I think, if you take the power platform example, the whole democratization and the power of building things being in the hands of end users is great on one level, but really scary on another. So how do you create a community around that? And one of the things that we're doing is technical centre of excellence, so we can see what is out there and we know what's happening, and then a set of guardrails and a community around that as well, so that we can make some assessments before we suddenly find that somebody's left the organisation and the business critical power app they developed is on its own, no one to support it. So for us, it's about creating that kind of more awareness, more culture and collaboration around some of those low-code, no-code kind of platforms that are available for people to use. We don't want to stop it entirely because we have nowhere near enough resource to fulfil all the demand that we've got. So how do we harness some of that? I've always been a believer in you can't eradicate shadow IT. It's going to happen and people will find a way of doing it. But if you're aware of it and you understand it and you can corral it and have a sensible conversation about how you might bring that back into your overall architecture, then that's a better thing than it just happening without your knowledge.
Venus, did you want to add anything to that?
I feel it's a great idea because rather than having too much governance or control on your estate, you actually harness what you have and the power of it and trying to get it grow and make sure that it gets proper support and like momentum, I guess, knowledge transfer and all those things. I do really envy when you say you have no legacy in your estate.
And no traditional, there's a legacy needs to be defined, right? We've probably got loads of legacy, but it's not the big COBOL.
Data center.
And I did study COBOL at university, so
Yeah.
I'm now thinking I need to dust off and remember where to put the full stop and
I've
earn a
got
lot
some
more
very
money.
strange skills from about
Good.
20 plus years ago that may be of use to somebody at some point. Old IBM mainframes and all sorts, I dread to think.
Yeah. So I think, we as I say, for me, the kind of overriding drive is to make sure that we're not sleepwalking into another big set of problems. And just because we're consuming a load of stuff off of platforms doesn't mean we can forget about it. So there's definitely something with suppliers and our tech partners to understand roadmap, to understand what if they're thinking of deprecating certain features, how that hangs together with our wider architecture. But it's that kind of culture of inquisitiveness and looking forward, not necessarily, just kind of focusing on this could quickly become a legacy problem. It's just something that we need to kind of keep evolving.
I think that's a very good point in terms of addressing this, rather than being, because legacy has sometimes quite a negative meaning in this, but actually conveying it in terms of opportunities ahead. Like if we can address this, then it will allow us to move forward with the new technology, move forward with innovation and things. So for me as well, it's about understanding the estate, because I'm an enterprise architect, needs to understand the estate, and quantifying legacy in terms of like risk and impact. Risk, we talk about, impact is, organization impact, financial impact, that kind of things. And then both David and Mark has mentioned that not all things are bad. Sometimes we don't have to get rid of all things. And so understanding what we want to change and what we don't want to change, and building a roadmap to work towards, forward-looking roadmaps in terms of improving the organization estate. I think that's another way of addressing legacy.
Would you say that understanding of the different elements of it is one of the key things that you've been doing to address your legacy?
Yes, to have a holistic view of our estate, and then trying to quantifying legacy, and also trying to build roadmaps towards changing them.
Okay. So building on that, would, I'm sure, appreciate thoughts, and I know many of the audience would, on what would be, from each of you, the one thing that we either together or separately, depending on what it is, take forward out of this session. And actually, on reflection, is that the same thing that you thought you were going to say when you arrived here this afternoon? Mark?
Yeah, Ross. So my view's not been changed, actually.
Okay.
It's all about people for me. People make the world go round. We're all here as people. We all want to do the best for each other and our citizens. So look at the people, look what they want, bring them on the journey with you, and together you can do great things. Make sure that that collaboration is there, but do everything from a user-centred perspective.
Yeah, so I'm going to say something that was slightly different. I was going to say something, I was going to reiterate my point about management, etc. But actually, inspired by Mark, I'm going to say it is all about people. I'd say the key thing is give people room and respect, particularly those people who've been working on legacy systems. And what I mean by that is that occasionally people look at it as they're the team who've been working on this boring old legacy system that's been chuntering away for decades and everybody hates it. Another way of looking at it would be, here is a highly experienced software development team who's have done lots of engineering to keep a steam engine going in the age of electricity, and have got decades of really four-class operational software engineering experience. Maybe, actually, they're some of our most valuable people, and they just need a chance to, and to be honest, if they're good programmers, they're probably already programming in some other more modern language in their spare time. So let's just give them a chance to bring their skills to work. But also, when I say give them the room, quite often they're also the people who know the refactoring that needs to be done. Just the one fix that if they made that, they get 10%, 100% more performance out of the system. But that thing is never on the backlog because they don't get listened to. So I'd say give the people who are working on legacy systems room and respect, and they'll work wonders both on the new stuff and on the stuff they've been looking after for a long while.
And if I may, David, just to build on that, just about the technologies. This needs to be driven from the top and have executive sponsorship and to be cascaded down, because the commercial teams need to work in a different way. Maybe they're moving from waterfall to agile, so how do you measure success in the new way of doing things? How does the project managers deal in an agile scrum methodology compared to, you know, old monolithic systems of the past? So I think pretty much each and every single person needs to adapt and realise what they can do for legacy.
Thank you.
And I'd forgotten I was supposed to be thinking of that anyway,
Well,
so it's
bear
not.
with me.
Look, building on that, for me, this is a collective endeavour, right? And I mentioned it before about the different people that are involved. So that's both within inside an organisation, across different teams and across corporate services and across the wider organisation. But it's also across government, and it's with our suppliers and strategic partners in that. I think it's, you know, we can solve things together easier, I think, than we can on our own. And we're all dealing with very similar problems, just different contexts. So the more we can share, the more we can kind of work together, the better.
Thank you. Just as a heads up, so people can start thinking, going to be coming to all the questions in a bit. Venus.
I think it's just a lot of reminding remarks that, you know, in terms of legacy, it's not just about technology, but it's as much about people, and bringing them on the journey is important. And I would love to be, in a few years' time, be able to sit here and say, we have no legacy in Cabinet Office. That would be is going to be my goal.
I can sell you a platform, it's fine. You can buy it from us.
No, it's great. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. Interesting conversation. So everybody looks like they're still with us, so that's great. Any questions from the audience, please? I can see gentleman right at the back. I can't quite... Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Very, very insightful. Thank you to the panel. I'm Chris Weston from Juma. We've been doing a lot of legacy modernisation over the years, and one of the things that we've found is it's quite difficult within an organisation, whether it be public or private sector, for decision makers to emotionally get over the point where they can spend money essentially delivering something functionally the same as there was before. And the temptation is to build in new stuff, but that then just builds in risk and potential failure of a really important project. Have you come across this? Is this something that you can see in your areas?
David?
Can I
Yeah.
The legacy sell to decision makers and budget holders is a hard sell. I think for two reasons. One is because, as you say, it's kind of so you like me to give you loads of money to effectively stand still, and the other one is so you're telling me that all this stuff I've given you millions to build already is already broken, and apparently you need money to fix it now. So obviously that's not the pitch. I think I have an aspirational thing that I've very rarely succeeded in doing, and then a realistic thing. So I think the realistic thing is, I think the risk pitch is really powerful and valid. You know, I've never felt when I'm making a pitch on the need to do legacy remediation on the basis of risk that I'm being disingenuous, because it's genuinely real. I feel even better about that if I'm making a pitch that says, and I think this is where, while cloud doesn't fix anything, it can, if you move to managed services, can start to fix stuff at the infrastructure level, to say, if you can find the pitch that says, this is the investment in legacy that's going to get us off the treadmill. You know, at this point, we are going to stop moving backwards, because actually we are now, as part of the service we're buying, as long as we can make the CapEx to OpEx shift work well, we are now going to be getting some of that upgrade as a managed service. The thing that is aspirational, and I've, again, really succeeded in, I'd really love senior stakeholders to care about code, which is why it's heavily aspirational and probably not going to happen. I'm fortunate enough to work for a few tech companies where that is true, where the CEO has come up, been a software engineer. And if you work for organisations where software quality, code quality, investment in continuous refactoring is just an ingrained part of the culture, then it feels very different from a software engineering point of view, and it feels like you're genuinely investing in building assets that will stand the test of time, because you have the habits and behaviours and upfront investment that enable them to stand the test of time. That's a really hard pitch, and I haven't yet landed it very successfully very many times, but I'm still going to carry on making it.
I think I really feel when this question was being asked, because there was a service that we've spent 2 years trying to get the business unit trying to migrate to modern platform, and this week we finally get a go ahead, and it took 2 years to persuade the business to change. I think there's an element of getting the business to understand the risk that they are incurring with this legacy technology, but also benefits. Actually, there's a huge saving by moving to modern cloud, public clouds. But actually, there's a third major point is business readiness. I think sometimes they're not ready because they have other important things to do. They have to persuade their ministers, supplier cycle, funding cycle, all these things. I think persistence is quite important because now we have got the goal. I can tell you, persistence is worth it. Just keep going. But yeah, last week or 2 weeks ago, we just didn't know whether it was going to happen. But yeah, business readiness is one of the key things in here. And people readiness as well, whether people are trained, people are ready to accept the change, that kind of thing.
And some persistent people.
Yes.
Thank you. I think lady in the green jumper. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Can you put your hand up? Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm Kirsten Zeller from Westminster City Council. In thinking about legacy and not building legacy into the future, I was interested how and whether net zero and our carbon emissions factor into the conversations that you guys are having. I read some recent research that suggested a short ChatGPT chat costs about a bottle of water, per that user and that interaction, which makes me think a lot about, in our digital and innovation service, are we going to be able to meet those carbon emissions, which is very much part of our objective as a smart city team. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts.
Carl feels like a good place to start.
Thanks. Yeah. So I think increasingly more so it is, right? There's loads more work to do in that sort of space. I think we're had a conversation with somebody earlier, just struggling to get some of the data out of some of the large cloud providers as it is, let alone being able to determine if I release this service, it's going to cost X and Y. So I think there's a way to go on that personally, but like all things, you've got to start somewhere. So I think, again, this is for me another area of collaboration, right, across the wider public sector and the supplier base about how actually are we going to put some metrics in place that we can start to measure these things on. Otherwise, we'll just kind of, again, drift into a position that we're not quite comfortable with. But it does start with having some awareness. I don't think we've got enough. I don't know.
Yeah, and so I'm doing some work with DEFRA at the moment as part of one of their teams called Planet-Centred Design. And this is a team, not just in DEFRA, but it's across the NHS and the public services, that's looking at code. So certain codes take more electricity to run than other types of code. You might want to put something on a more expensive machine in the cloud that's more sustainable, which then comes into things called financial operations of the cloud, FinOps, and things called GreenOps that looks actually the GreenOps. So the likes of AWS and Azure now publish their CO2 figures for each of the components that you run. So you can actually start looking at price versus price, performance, and sustainability, and adjust the lever to get you to the right balance. So yeah, those things are definitely being worked on across government, and DEFRA are leading a bit of a charge on that, but there may be other pockets as well.
Thank you. Lady White Top. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Dawn Ripley, recent new head of Agile Delivery with UKSV, which is part of the Cabinet Office. I've got the joy of being directly between a legacy, keeping it live, and trying to bring in a new platform. One of the things I've become quite shocked about is the understanding of the risk appetite for something that I don't think is very novel or contentious, given everything you've said, and our transformation programme being quite stalled, I'm being quoted that the Cabinet Office's risk appetite for IT is low. Am I being told a porky pie? Is it a misunderstanding of what you mean? Or how am I supposed to understand what that is in order to innovate for the UKSV team?
Venus?
David is
Oh, let me
Cabinet Office as well.
have a go. So I think it's interesting, and again, if I compare and contrast with my old world in banking, which again didn't always get risk choices right, see the financial crisis, but had a fairly fine-tuned system for assessing risk. I think the interesting is, as you describe, risk appetite equals low is kind of a directional statement, but it doesn't actually, I don't find it enormously helpful. I think it would need further kind of quantification. It's a qualitative statement rather than a quantitative statement, and I think it would need quantification in order to assess for the legacy system what's in and out. I think also my observation is that risk appetite for technology is low is a very big umbrella term and wraps up an awful lot of things. It sounds like you're dealing with multiple types of risk. The risk of the system might fail, legacy system might fail, risk a vulnerability might be exploited, might be attacked, risk that you may introduce instability in the new system you're using, risk that the project might fail. I think having one risk appetite across all those categories of risk is probably less sophisticated than it needs to be. And so I want to break that down. So I'll make a personal offer. I'm very happy to spend some time with you and see if we can figure it out together and figure out how we can make it a bit more interesting.
All those technology, what's the business risk? Is the other, what's not going to happen if these things don't change? That's the other bit. Where's that conversation?
Yeah.
I think David is right though. It's a lot more complicated than just risk appetite low. I know that we have risk appetite from open to cautious. Depends on the importance of the system, the business risk. So yeah, it's definitely not just one rating over there.
I mean, the other thing I'd say, and as you're leading Agile, I'm sure I don't need to say this, but I'll say it anyway, is one of the big shifts I've seen in my, actually it's not a complete shift I've seen in my kind of career, has been certain beliefs of certain behaviours that were seen to be low risk have turned out to actually be high risk. So I think classic one for me is the approach to implementing technology change. I've worked for lots of large organisations that had massive air traffic control flow charts which showed that on 3 o'clock in the morning this Sunday we're going to release 2,000 changes because for some reason, it seems astonishing to say it now, we believe that releasing 2,000 changes at the same time while everybody's asleep and everybody's off on call is a good idea, rather than we're going to release 2,000 changes steadily, multiple intraday releases through the week when everybody's awake and alert and ready to do it. So I think there are things which are perceived to be risky, often by people who've not done a huge amount of deployments, that are actually less risky than they appear. So there's kind of misperception of what behaviours are risky and what are not risky. So again, I think one of the things we can helpfully do for people is explain to them why that thing that sounds intuitively low risk is actually higher risk than doing the thing they think is high risk.
Thank you. So I think we've got time for maybe 2 more questions. Yeah, okay. The gentleman on this side at the front, thank you.
Hi, I'm Seb, I'm a reporter from Computer Weekly. I'm interested in, so obviously when you speak to suppliers, they want everything to be sticky. They want everything to be lasting for ages. So when you're kind of approaching it, I guess, from the initial procurement, how do you kind of manage those kind of different imperatives to make sure you're not kind of quickly saddled with something that's quite old quite quickly and, you can't integrate with it or it's difficult to manage and things like that? So how do you kind of approach
I'm not sure
that?
I'd agree all suppliers. I'd like things to be
Well,
sticky.
you come from a supplier.
I guess
so,
depends on your definition of sticky. But thank you for
but generally,
yeah. Yes.
So in part, I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier around that, continuous improvement, continuous investment. Often I heard last week somebody say thing X is very difficult to move away from. But how many times do we not plan that in from the beginning?
Yep.
What's the life cycle management? Where are the conversations we're having with business leaders to say, actually, the lifespan of this thing is probably going to be 2 to 3 years. In that time frame, we've got to start thinking about how we might improve it, swap it out, do whatever. Not enough of those discussions are had early on. They normally come when it hits a crunch point and we go, oh, there's a big legacy issue here. How do we solve it? Oh, now we've got to find the kind of OPEX and we don't have it. So for me, again, it's the cultural thing. It's like being really clear on what are we doing? How long do we think it's going to last for? And do we have a clear path to continuously improve and make that investment discussion? So to the other question as well, it's a hard sell. What does it pass the so what test if you're saying I need another couple of million quid to do exactly the same thing in some modern technology? If you had a lower level continuous investment path, that might be an easier route to kind of get there. So I think it's just about, for me, it's about changing that dynamic and having that conversation.
Yeah. I think just maybe one quick agree with everything Carl said, just one further thought, which is I think these days we have to be conscious we're buying pipelines, not products. I can remember, a long time ago, it used to be you buy a product and the next release would be in 3 years' time, and you'd have lots of quarterly reviews and there'd be a big build up to it and a big upgrade cycle. Whereas now, particularly if we're buying software as a service or platform services, then actually we're buying into a continued upgrade cycle. So the ability and plans for the vendor to provide continuous additional value on top of whatever the features are on the day you do the evaluation is a key part of also doing that evaluation.
Yeah, and as a supplier, as I spoke about before, that digital skills gap, it's about identifying gaps in your existing organisation, plugging those, retraining. It's all about your people, bringing in your partners to plug the gaps and to upskill yourselves to go and run that. I'm seeing less and less over the last 20 years, managed services and public services as more come in, help us understand the challenge, help us develop something. With the advent of GDS, the government opened standards and moved to, non-proprietary software, COTS products and open standards. I believe that stickiness is old-fashioned and largely does not exist.
Thank you. Who's lady, middle? Thank you. For the last question.
Thank you. Sophie Peachy from IOTICS. I've been making a personal observation that choices these days seem to be driven more about data and less about systems. So certainly hearing from Caroline Bellamy, CDO over at Ministry of Defence, she talks more about how do we link data fabrics, plural, and how are we driving the agenda in that way. So you're talking about legacy systems. Is that about we need to surface data from those systems, not necessarily change those systems? Is that what is driving the decisions?
I can make a comment. It's a good question, I think so, because we're all quite thoughtful about it, so I'm not quite sure we know the answer. I think one observation I'd have, and again, this is probably going to be me contradicting myself when I said old is not bad. Code doesn't go off unless you make it go off. But at the same time, circumstances change. And I'm conscious that many systems built years ago were built in a world where an interface spoke to a back-end database and it wrote and it read and it occasionally updated or deleted, and that's pretty much it. And the interaction with that might have been a batch file or some kind of mechanism. Whereas these days, particularly as we are in the era of the two letters that we weren't going to mention, AI, the ability to combine data for insight and to do proper data science is an enormous source of value. So I think there is a generation of legacy systems where the ability to access the data any other way than through the UI wasn't really built into the system, and that modern systems, a feature of those needs to be the ability to expose data and make it consumable for multiple purposes, including analytics and model building. I think, this is me being very speculative now, the current wave of interest in AI may push that even further than it is at the moment. I'm not quite sure what form that will take at the moment. I mean, the other observation worth making is that the data world itself is littered with legacy. If I think back, we've been building data warehouses, data marts, data lakes, data lake houses, all these things for
Swamps.
many years, data swamps, and very few times. I very rarely meet somebody who goes, yep, we've got the data sorted. It's all in the place I want it to be, and I can do everything with it I want. So I don't think the tech industry has quite got the products right yet either.
So I was trying to think of another word other than system to not confuse it, but it's the system of stuff that we're doing as a whole rather than systems. So whether that's data and data repositories and our approach to data, whether that's the code, it's the people aspect. So I think there's this kind of collective system of legacy that we've got, and within that there are different elements to it, which is why the definition is quite important, being really clear on why we think this legacy thing is a particular problem. Is it because we don't have people to maintain it? Is it because of the security? Is it because of resilience, etc.? All of those different components together. For me, it's not just as simple as, is it a data problem or is it a set of platform type problems? There's a collection of random things.
I think, I totally agree. And thinking about some of the very old systems where they are still using very old databases, proprietary databases, and even if you want to do something to improve it, like you want to take a snapshot every night or something, it's very difficult. Getting the data out is very difficult because the data model is proprietary. So moving that into a more modern system where there is already a lot of out-of-the-box solution to improve the data landscape is definitely one of the drivers, and actually one of the must before we can move to a more open data scenario and doing better thing with the data as well.
Thank you. Can I say thank you very much to the panel? It's a complex issue, many factors that need to be considered, and we've touched on a number this afternoon. I think continuous collaboration to drive the right impact and make the right decisions is going to be important. So huge thank you to the panel, but also huge thank you to the audience. Great questions, which makes my life a lot easier. Didn't have to come back to any backup. So thank you for listening, and thank you very much for participating. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the panellists and to Ros. We're now going to take a short coffee break and we will be back here in 20 minutes. Thank you very much.